All right. Well, hey, welcome everybody, and thank you all for spending an hour with us for lunch to learn about supply chain management and the related concepts that it involve. And hopefully, we're going to explore some interesting issues. Obviously, since this pandemic has begun, supply chain management has been in the news and has been part of our lives, whether we wanted to accept it or not. For me, it's very exciting because I teach this for a living. So I am immensely grateful to have the support of two people I want to acknowledge in the beginning. First is ITT, and they're going to talk a lot about their fabulous company, and they're local here, based in Seneca, right down the road from us here. So we thank them for their support in this process. And I'd also like to thank the Masters of Global Supply Chain Management here at RIT in the Saunders College. We recently launched a master's degree that started right now. And if you're interested, you can contact me. We can talk about it, but we can talk about all that kind of stuff as we continue with this discussion. And right now, I don't have to say anything smart or interesting. I just have to introduce the person you all came here to see and talk to, which is Nico. So Nico, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Dave. So yes, it's our pleasure to be joining you in this fabulous journey. I think it's talking about supply chain in this moment is it's a fantastic thing. Supply chain is evolving every day. It's changing the way we do business, and I think it's fantastic to see that there is a lot of interest around this topic. So my name is Nicola Maricelli, as you say. Sound Italian. I'm from Europe. My family and I grew up in Switzerland. And from there, I study economics and finance, not exactly the structured path to get to supply chain, but it was my passion at that moment to understand numbers. And after that, I moved into Canada for a quick finishing my thesis at the Vancouver Center. And from there, I started my journey into supply chain. I went to Mexico to do an internship in a manufacturing company that built steel and tubular pipe. And from there, I started navigating a little bit through Latin America. I ended up working for them in Houston, Texas, where I moved into oil and gas permanently through Halliburton. I discovered a little bit the sourcing with them. I was in charge of the global sourcing solutions. And then I moved into globally with them into Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, a little bit of Europe. I did the operational supply chain. As we will talk later, supply chain is a very big and broad aspect of everything we do today. It goes from how to manufacture something, how to transport something, how to buy something, it's how to negotiate something. And then I moved back to the US in 2019, where I was driving all the sourcing solution, all the project management, and the technology for Halliburton, before moving last March, right before the pandemic hit the globe. Actually, in the middle of the pandemic hitting the globe, I moved into ITT as a vice president for the sourcing solution and the procurement.
Awesome. That encapsulates a broad and wide sweeping career in a relatively concise amount of time. And we're going to explore all those different elements, because one of the unique things that we've got with Nico is that his experience in supply chain is at many different areas of the supply chain. And so, the one thing that I think you and I could both agree on, Nico, certainly, is that there's not one concept really of supply chain. There's so much going on. So with that said, how do you view supply chain management? I mean, if we were running into an elevator and I wasn't a professor who was talking your ear off, and I said, hey, you do supply chain, what exactly is that? What would you tell me?
Well, the beauty of supply chain, I agree with you. It's something that is evolving every day. If you consider supply chain 20, 30 years ago, it was basically a physical and static things that was related to manufacturing and how to deliver our goods to our customer. Today, you're talking about digitalization, you're talking about numbers, you're talking about how we can get closer to our customers. So you are entering to a new process of all the supply chain that is not anymore a support function of what we do in our company, but it's part of the decision maker of what we do every day in our company. And it's right there, right? If you look at it, I mean, there is recent data, 94% of the Fortune 1000 company has been disrupted during the pandemic. And from that 94%, 75% have major disruption from the pandemic. 50% of those have actually had to review their outlook for 2021 and 2022 due to these factors. And all of this is due to a supply chain factor, right? We were not considering certain risk. We were not considering how to evaluate our vendor based on how resistant is our vendor, how sustainable is what we are trying to achieve with our supply chain. So in my opinion, today supply chain is a huge network that connect vendor to our company, to our customer in different level, right? We are looking at a series of networks that interconnect every single supply chain at global level. Good or bad, an event like COVID, which we call a black swan, can affect the entire globe in today's business. It's not affecting anymore one or two businesses or one or two countries or one or two regions. It's affecting everybody. You can see it in the wholesale of medicine. I mean, if you take in account that India basically is the leading provider globally of pharmaceutical generic prescription, 75% of what they do today is come from China. And from that 75%, it comes from 30% of it comes from the region that was most impacted by COVID. If you move into Latin America, same thing. Mexico, Chile rely 90 to 95% on India and on China for their active ingredient for the medicine prescriptions. So we really need to evaluate all our supply chain to understand where the risks are. And that's more and more important for each company and each business we're operating. And let's move away from that, from product. Today, the logistic, which is one of the main components of supply chain, represent $1 trillion business in the US. That's more than 8% of the GDP of the country. It's a huge aspect of the country. 15.7 million trucks are delivering in the US every year. And that's more than, if you think about it, it's more than 5 billion miles per year of trucks out there making deliveries. It's unbelievable how big is the supply chain today. And I can tell you, the company that understand this and embrace the supply chain and understand that supply chain need to be shaped into the business of what we do every day are those that have a competitive advantage on today's market. We are facing a very difficult time. The volatility in today's market is unbelievable. I mean, our business cycle are getting tougher and tougher. They are getting, the ups and downs that you see in the market change every single year today. And if you're not able to adapt to that, you're not going to keep your profitability and you're not going to keep your cost under control. And that's why when I see supply chain, I don't see anymore something static. I see something that is evolving every single day. It's very important to understand that we need a very smart, very segmented and custom-centric supply chain to be able to be agile on what we do, to be robust and to be resilient and sustainable, because something that nobody even considered in the past is how sustainable is my supply chain. And that's why we always lose so much time on cost-driven supply chain actions. That's not what we do today. That's not what supply chain should be focused today. Cost is only one of the 1,000 things supply chain should be focused.
So there's a lot to unpack there, and I love the emphasis that Nico placed on risk management, and we're going to get to that, particularly around what happens when disruptions impact the supply chain. The other thing I really like that you said was about sustainability. It's kind of counterintuitive that companies weren't thinking about sustainability, right? Because if you're tapping out all of the raw materials that you require for production and you run out of them, you can no longer produce, right? So you kind of, you cut off your nose to spite your face kind of situation. So we're going to get back to that for sure. But if I can codify it into, let's say, one sentence, it was a long elevator ride we just had. So let's say we're almost at the top floor. Basically, would you agree that supply chain management is the coordination of all the processes from raw material to production to storage to distribution to whoever the customer is? Would you agree?
Fully agree. Yes, sir.
Awesome. That's good. So then at least I quasi know what I'm talking about. Nico made sure I'm not saying stupid things, which is good. Okay, so I really like this, and I like where this discussion's going. And there's a couple branches that I want to take this on. The first is, and your introduction and your description of supply chain introduced this perfectly. Let's say you're sitting in the audience, you're saying, you know, it's a fabulously interesting concept. I've been hearing about it, reading about it. I'm interested, but I don't know where to start in terms of my career. You know, what jobs would you recommend people look at to start, or how would a typical supply chain career path now versus when you got in the game, what would that look like?
Yes, and thank you for that question, Steve. I think that a lot of people are interested into supply chain, and we need to look where supply chain is going. And I think that where we're going is through a transformation. We're not anymore that tactical support function, as we say before. We are a transformational part of the company. And I want to emphasize the fact that to do transformation, you need to understand where you sit today, what's your business today. So for me, very important is data. Data analytics is one of the most critical things for any business today, and more is critical for supply chain. If we don't understand our spend, we don't understand where the money is going, we don't understand the TCO of our product, we don't understand the market trend, and we are not doing proper supply chain for today, and we're not planning for tomorrow. So if I need to suggest something for students today, it's yes, macroeconomics is fantastic. How to move a product around is fantastic, but if you want to be successful in the future, you need to get your mind around data. You need to understand how to segment data, how to read statistic, how to project a cost model in the future. All of this is key and fundamental for the supply chain of the future.
So you touched on something, you touched on two things that are just critical. Data-driven decision-making, absolutely. And as I said before, risk management. But one thing that came to mind as you brought up the data and the importance of the data and leveraging data for insight, you know, one of the things that I preach is, because we're not a tactical function anymore in supply chain, we are value creators. We're not cost centers. So how do you envision that? I mean, can you think of some examples throughout your career where you've not been kind of a line item on a budget, whereas you've been creating value and increasing profit and increasing revenue and driving cost reductions? Any examples of that in your career?
Sure. I mean, I think that it's across, you can feel it across a lot of business. Before, whenever we hit a crisis, we always try to use supply chain to navigate cost, which is very important, right? Today, to maintain profitability, one of the bigger thing that the company are trying to do is manage my cost, which is very important. But again, if you look at the company today, they're actually investing more and more money on supply chain and not cutting it as we're cutting other part of the segment of the business, because we understand where the market is going and how important is supply chain on creating value added. And with value added, I mean, this is the perfect moment to restructuring your supply chain. And what I mean with that is to understand where are your key supplier, start segmenting your market, start segmenting your supplier, who is creating the biggest value added. Look into your supplier base, not only for cost, quality, and on-time delivery, but you need to add things like how agile is my vendor, how robust and resilient is my vendor, and how sustainable is his business. If we are dealing only with China and India because those are low-cost region, well, I can tell you today you will be in a very struggle moment, most with India than with China, because China recovered quite fast. But it's proven that a lot of companies went through a very deep valley through the COVID because they were focused only on cost. Today, yep. Supply chain need to bring difference to the market. They need to realize that whenever you operate in the US, you have Latin America as a potential source of market. You have local business that are diverse business that can support you in the same way that low-cost region support you. You need to cost model out what you do and understand how you bring value in a different form, right? It's not all about cost. It's absolutely not all about cost. Timeline today allowed us to win business. But if you read supply chain only for cost reduction, you will never allow supply chain to have your mom and pop shops across the street doing machining for you, because you don't understand how important is timeline. Whenever you connect supply chain with sales department and you see that we're losing business because of the time of responsiveness of our product, you need to understand that you need to be closer to your vendor base. So it's not all about cost.
Absolutely. And your examples echoed that well. So let's move into one topic that in my mind, I read an example midway through the pandemic, or at least middle of the early response to the pandemic, which blew my mind from a sourcing standpoint, right? So if we're moving into sourcing, we're talking about managing the external resources of the company, acquiring product, dealing with vendors, exactly what you were just talking about. And one example that I read was in Wuhan, where the virus was said to have started and at least proliferate. That area is a high-tech sector. So from what I read, there's about 9,000 or so, and the number could change, but there's about 9,000 or so tech suppliers to companies, maybe even ITT, but all around the world, certainly. So when the shutdown happened, immediately there was the supply valve was cut off. So what you said in terms of cost, I bet a lot of companies over the past 10, 15, perhaps even 20 years have moved away from multiple vendors to a single vendor, right? So do you have any examples of how sourcing strategy can help manage risk, how dealing with multiple vendors and choosing them strategically can help mitigate risk when something like this happens?
Absolutely. So whenever I joined ITT back in early last year, so basically one of our strategy was the consolidation of the vendor base. We had too many vendors, and we had to consolidate those to navigate through cost and have better alliance with the vendor, better cost. It was all about cost. And then the pandemic hit, and the pandemic made us understand that the process we were trying to take needed some twists, needed some changes, because we can consolidate, but we need to do it in a smart way. We cannot consolidate. We have multiple sites, and if we consolidate everything through low-cost region, we will not be able to even navigate through something like a COVID-19 situation in the future. So we had to rethink all our strategy. We had to start segmenting our vendor and look into different aspects that only cost. We look, as we say before, we look into how resilient is a vendor, how robust, as agile is a vendor, and how close is to our business. So, and not only that, a supply chain need to start strategizing and put together scenarios. If China goes down, who else can supply me product and goods at the same level of time, and the same quality, at the same level of cost, or a little bit higher? How are we gonna react if the logistic of the entire world gets shut down? And guys, we were very close to do so. I mean, there were a huge international air freight capacity that went down, because we don't think about how much we are shipping through regular airline, but it's probably the majority of what we do. And then the cargo saw the opportunity to maintain their cost high, so they start parking completely vessel to maintain the cost of cargo high, because they saw the decrease of volume movement across the globe. So there is all those things that are going on as we speak in the globe, and the supply chain needs to be look at it, see it, and react. So that's why it's not only a transactional thing, it's a transformational thing. We need to start thinking about scenario strategy around all these kind of scenarios.
Oh, that's an outstanding breakdown. So if I can, I just want to take a minute to kind of recap what we've said so far, and then I think it'll help when we move into the next kind of segment. So first of all, what have we done? We've established the fact that Nico's been to 300 of the 180 countries in the world, and he's worked on most of them, which is fabulous. But we have established that, look, a supply chain, we're bringing raw materials, transformation, storage, and distribution. We also established that it's not tactical. It's not something that go out and buy stuff, whatever that stuff might be. It has an actual value added to the organization, be it through quality, through risk management, through cost reduction is an element of it, but not the sole reduction. So this is what's greasing the wheels of industry, right? Supply chains making that happen. And what Nico said is, I think he provided a lot of different areas where, if you're interested in supply chain, where you could start working. I mean, you could look into sourcing, you could look into logistics, all of which the demand for are not going down anytime soon. In fact, quite the opposite. So with all that said, and that is a backdrop, let's talk about the invisible elephant in the room, COVID. So Nico, my first question is, and I think it'd be interesting to answer it if you could from two different lenses. The first lens is going to be from how ITT's been impacted, your business in general, and maybe even your industry. And then the second is how you think the consumer market has been impacted. But basically the question is, what has COVID done to your normal operations?
Well, basically, very quick answer is we basically changed from normal operation to every day is it's a firefighting situation, right? I mean, we have, especially when you are a global company with several country operation, it's you are not prepared for what's coming. You're not prepared enough for what's coming. Especially, we were not prepared enough for what was coming. We had a very diversified type of sourcing. We have a lot of country, a lot of source of origin, which was actually helping us. It helped us a lot. We had so many vendors that actually our impact it was not as big as it could be because we had a lot of vendors. Now, the truth of the fact that I can feel it for a lot of companies that rationalize their vendor base and I actually tried to consolidate it before the pandemic. What happened during the pandemic was that if they were consolidating through some country that fully shut down, they were basically closed for month and month. We had vendors that we have today vendors that didn't recover yet from the pandemic, that they are still struggling through this, and they still have 6, 7, 8 months of delays. So the impact on the business it's pretty significant. We had a lot of company, as we say before, more than 50% of the Fortune 1000 company had to review their outlook for 2021, 2022 due to the pandemic, which is pretty impressive, right? If you think about it. So I feel that we were lucky because we had a lot of vendor base and a very robust US vendor base, which was growth during the years. It helped us a lot. The US, if you think about it, we didn't shut down that long. We had some spread here and there. There were some company closing for a couple of weeks or 1 or 2 months, but that was it. We were business-wise lucky to be operating our biggest manufacturing center in the US. I mean, there were countries like France, like Eastern Europe that they shut down for month and month. And that caused severe disruption in a lot of businesses. The electronic business that you were referring before probably got even luckier because China, at the end of the day, didn't shut down for that long time. They did it 2 months and they were back in track and running. So that was pretty impressive. Now, what actually happened in those months, you will see supply chain sourcing person organizing a truck for the vendor that couldn't move the material around. So I think that the network that we were talking before of supply chain get closer and closer because when you are very close to a vendor, you understand where the struggle is. And I feel that most of the struggle after the shutdown was on logistics. How we're going to move things around if we don't have the way to move it around. And that was a big hurdle. I mean, there were cargo not pick up for weeks and weeks. And that was because there was no capacity. They were not the people to drive a truck. The reality of certain countries like India, they are still have to still come out from the pandemic, and I think it's going to stay for a couple of more months there. So that's what we face, right?
So the biggest impact that you saw, I mean, obviously it's a ripple, but the biggest impact was from the lack of logistics capacity to move product because at least for a certain period of time, assembly lines were still kicking out product. So stocks were piling up, basically unnecessary safety stock just sitting somewhere, no logistics capacity to move it. So that causes a huge problem, of course. Now, did you see anything in terms of, so you mentioned you had a lot of vendors, so you had a little flexibility to rearrange sourcing, right? But did you see any other companies in your industry have problems acquiring raw materials, or did the production process change over the course of COVID?
Yes, and I think we went through it as well. I mean, whenever you think about, again, one of the major countries that a lot of industry are operating is India. I mean, because it's one of the biggest countries in the world. I mean, if you think about the countries, it's a massive country. It's one that next year is projecting a double-digit GDP. So country that everybody wants to be, or needs to be, if you want to do manufacturing business together, even with China, right? So India first went through a shutdown. We know the major city shut down, and the logistic network of India moved to the big ports, right? You're looking about Pune, you're looking about Mumbai, you're looking about those big ports. And the issue was the raw material was going through those ports. A lot of metals are not produced locally. They come from abroad. Some of our raw material come from Europe, and we are manufacturing in India and then exporting it. And that was a big, had a big impact because you couldn't move raw material. There was a local a full shutdown on Mumbai that you couldn't even get in with a truck and pick up any material. So again, that made us realize that we need to be deeper involved with our vendor. We don't need only to understand our vendor network and look at quality, on-time delivery, and cost. We need to understand who they are buying the raw material from, who their raw material supplier are buying there, or they are manufacturing the raw material with, where the origin of the product is, to try to create scenarios. So if we start thinking about, okay, if we need to shut down our operation in India, who else can provide us this material? Now, some of us reacted faster because of stock opportunity or because shorter lead time on producing the item. Whenever you are talking about pumps, the lead time can be several months. So it's not that easy to divert your production around the world. Again, luckily we have diversity of supplier, which helped us and made us rethink our strategy for the future.
So let's just unpack that, and then I have a follow-up. So when you talk about lead times, you're talking about the time from when the production starts to when the product is complete and shipped, right? So that's the first thing. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing there. The second thing is, you know, maybe 15, 20 years ago, the dominant logic, or at least the prevailing best practice, was lean. Thin out inventories, ensure that we only have lot sizes in production of one. That would really be a problem in terms of risk management in this case, right? When you have a supply interruption, was ITT operating in a lean sense, or was there sufficient safety stock as a policy in place?
We operate in different business. So whenever it's a project business, you really build to project, and you build to order. So there is very little stock for maybe some common raw materials, some common product. But that's basically when you're operating on project, and those are the part of the segment where we got a little bit more affected than our regular product, off-the-shelf product that we build stock for, right? I don't think we're gonna, we might or might not review a little bit the factor of how much inventory you want to carry, because we don't foresee most probably a strong recovery in the short time, right? You're looking into a recovery that's going to take over in 2021, a slower pace, and then it's coming in a little bit more in 2022 and 2023. So you're not looking at something that is probably going to boom next year. So you don't have to probably adjust too much your inventory, thinking that this is going to affect your sales next year. But of course, we had to review our MRP system, how we are going to build inventory, where we're building those inventory, and where we're keeping those inventory. Because the strategy was a lot of company wanted the just in time. I want the vendor to keep in consignment stock. Well, if you're keeping your consignment stock in India during a pandemic, you were stuck for a while without having chance to move material. If you were doing the same in Europe, you would probably get stuck during this time that the COVID is still gonna threat and block a lot of businesses in Europe as well. So it's most probably the company will start rethinking that part and maybe keep a little bit of their inventory in their house, working it out. There is a lot of way that the relationship with the vendor allow to keep the inventory closer to home, right? And that's what we're trying to do today.
So two things I want to emphasize that you just said. The first is because supply chains aren't this monolithic one thing, there's different products and the supply chains are designed around them. So when it's something completely custom, the way that sourcing strategy and production strategy looks totally different than it's something like hand sanitizer that we're producing and putting on the shelf. That was the first important point that you mentioned, and different products got impacted differently. The second thing that I want to emphasize that you said was you were talking about MRP systems and ERP systems and basically the role of, or the importance of, information technology and management information systems within supply chain. So I'm not sure how many students we've got on the call, but those students who are thinking, I really like management information systems. Wonder where supply chain can fit in. Well, the management information systems end up providing the backbone to acquire that data and to analyze it, like Nico was saying. So I'm sure Nico's in his ERP system once or twice every minute, maybe, or at least very frequently, right? It's probably
No, I
quite
agree,
a bit.
Steve. The data is the base and the foundation of everything we do. I mean, if you look at the transformation of the supply chain is going to go through in the next year, it's going to be a very fast transformational where I understand not all the company can have an end-to-end supply chain. We have small businesses, but they will need to rely on digitalization of supply chain through third parties. So they will have to go out and that's a way to do it. I mean, a lot of companies do it and it's pretty brilliant what they're offering as a solution. You need to go out and buy somebody that offer you real data, real market information, real assessment of your strategies and review with you in a digital way. That's fundamental in today's market. That's one of the first steps of the transformation that the supply chain needs to do.
I love that you brought that up. So just to let everybody know kind of where we're at in the timeline, I'm going to ask Nico a couple more questions. That should take about another maybe 7 or 8 minutes, and then we're just going to open it up to discussion. So if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat now. I'll read them in a first in, first out queue for any accountants on the call or former accountants in the case of maybe Nico. But no, so my first follow-up question is we've been talking and the world has been talking as far as supply chain goes, China, India, right? And obviously these are two giant markets from whom we source and then ultimately we sell to. But I've been thinking a lot about South America in general. Have you seen or do you do business with South America? Because they have an opposite season cycle. And so as we were headed into the spring and summer, they're heading into the winter. Did that impact your business as it relates to COVID at all?
No, and I fully agree with you. We need to look into South America. We have a lot of business in South America. We had a big facility in Mexico. And if you look at the transformation of COVID, a lot of automotive companies start moving into Mexico. And not only, we're not talking about the Ford, we're not talking about the Fiat of the market, we're talking about the component builder of the manufacturing for automotive. They start looking into Latin America because one is closest to one of the biggest markets of the world, which is the United States. Second, is pretty stable. Yes, they have issue with the security. They have a lot of issue, but they are pretty stable as a country. And second, it offer you this diversity of seasonality, diversity of potential environmental that allow you to have a faster reaction to this kind of situation. I mean, if you look at the flu, the pandemic, the swine flu, you look at all those growth in Asia. So a lot of people are trying to find alternative to Asia, and that's Latin America is one of those. A lot of automotive company moved into Mexico, moved into Central America, and we are trying to do the same. We had already vendor base in Mexico. We are at the vendor base in Brazil. We are trying to develop those to be closest to what we do, at least for North America.
So you mentioned the different seasons, and I mean, it really is a modern marvel that in the middle of the winter in North America, when it's freezing, or in Rochester, tomorrow when it starts snowing, that we could get an apple or an orange or whatever fruit that's not grown during the season, that we can get it in the middle of the off season, right? So the same kind of logic is true in business to business markets, is what you're saying, where if we're operating on a certain type of season, they're operating on the exact opposite, we could take advantage of it, right? And companies should start to look at South America for things like that.
Yeah, and I think that what you did, an example, agriculture is the biggest market, most probably, that explored this already a long time ago, right? They were producing in Latin America and exporting it when it was winter in Europe. So for us, was having the strawberry during Christmas, right? That came from Latin America, of course. And for us, manufacturing, I mean, it's never ending, right? I understand the seasonality, but it's not very affected by winter or summer because
Sure.
You are under a roof all the time, but it helps. Again, at the end of the day, it helped to be closer to your market. It helped reconsidering the factor that China and India are going to be still very powerful, still cost efficient, but you need to look at different aspects. So how close you want to be to your business, how much you want to put in, how many eggs you want to put in one basket, because that's a big risk. I mean, you cannot have all your eggs with one vendor. I mean, how resilient is the vendor to this kind of situation? I can tell you there were a lot of vendors that didn't even figure it out where the raw material was coming for them, right? So I think that that's pretty impressive, and it was an opening eyes for each one of us in supply chain. How prepared are you for these situations? I mean, look around. I mean, the business that went really skyrocketing are the business that were doing distribution, and because they had the availability, Amazon, it's skyrocketing every day. The people are afraid to go out to a grocery shop. They order everything online. So that's part of the transformation of supply chain. I mean, we went from something that was the people wanted to see the apple they were buying to I want to buy it online and I want to have it in 1 hour from now and I'm willing to pay for it. And that's going to be more and more the reality of where we're moving to.
It's remarkable how accustomed as consumers we get to the speed, of delivery. But my last question, and then I'd like to open it up. So going back to kind of thinking about things globally, because that's the whole point of our discussion, global supply chain management. Over the past several years, China has been making a huge investment on the continent of Africa. They've been investing in infrastructure. They've been investing in human capital. They've been investing with opening up companies there. So obviously, they're planning for the future because Africa as a continent is rich with a lot of natural resources, but currently it requires a little bit of development on infrastructure. Do you see companies like yours or your peer companies thinking about the continent of Africa as kind of the future of where to start looking for the next source of raw materials?
It's a very difficult question for us. I mean, metals are strong in Africa. They're strong in Latin America. I think that we are looking more into how to source this from Latin America maybe first.
Okay.
Africa is the future for a lot of things. And I agree with you. They need a lot of development, and that's the bridge that China is using to get in. And India will probably follow pretty soon. They are helping the country to develop for free, allowing to open the door to everything they need to develop that country. And that's how they get their feet in. And that's probably the future of what they will do. I mean, 50% of the business in Italy are owned by Chinese companies. So that's another very impressive things. If you look at the big brand and the big names across the different industry, China is behind a lot of those, right? I mean, they are positioning themselves for the future, and that's clear everywhere you look. They are positioning themselves as a superpower, not only economical, but strategically. They are in every country you look into it, and that's the way they want to be perceived in the future.
And they even had that initiative to build the infrastructure from China all the way across down into Europe, right? The Silk Road, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's no, this has been fascinating, and we could probably talk for the next 24 hours. So
Yes.
I'm going to stop talking since I do it for a living, and I'm going to open it up to questions. So anybody out there in the audience, if you've got questions, feel free to enter them into the chat. I will read them in order, and it looks like we've got one from Olivia. She's a student at RIT, and the question is, how are technology advancements affecting careers within the field, in a good way or in a bad way? So if I read the question right, I'm thinking maybe something like AI and other technological advancements. How are they impacting supply chain?
They're impacting it big time. I mean, if we think about how much time we needed to analyze data in the past, right? You have everything in Excel. Excel was the thing of the present when I was, and it's still today. I mean, we do a lot of things in Excel, and Excel is still a magic tricks that we use every time we can. I mean, in the past, you were taking information and you had to filter it, clean it, review it 300 times. And when you're looking at 10 rows, it's one thing. When you're looking at 60,000 rows or 60 million rows, it's where it gets very tricky and complicated. So you start creating your own macro, you start creating your own advanced system to filter and clean the data, but they're not perfect. And that's where the AI come up, and those systems that help you to clean the data, but they learn from the data. They understand that this vendor is a casting vendor, this vendor is a fabrication vendor, this is an indirect vendor. And they learn from it. They learn from the description of the material. They learn for what you do, and they give you better and better information all the time. So that's fundamental for supply chain. I think it's actually helping us to perfect what we do every day.
Absolutely. Cloud computing and distributed technology like that is just, it's unbelievable. Okay. Hey, it looks like one of my students is here. Hi, Sam. Hopefully you're listening. Nice to see you here. Okay. So Sam asks, what impact do you think the restrictions the U.S. is placing on goods from offshore, particularly China and Europe, will have in addition to the impact of COVID? That's the first part. The second part is, how will technology be used to counter this? So what impact does this whole trade tariff barriers, all this kind of stuff have? And then how, if at all, will technology be able to impact that?
Yeah. And actually, I think it's a very good question. First point is that tariffs were there since a long time, right? I mean, I remember when I was working for steel in 2007-8, we already had tariff for China. Now, the truth of the fact that now there's 25% across a lot of products, and that's affecting a lot of businesses. I mean, it's in my opinion, it's supply chain in this kind of challenges need to find alternative sources. They need to find better local networks. Of course, they need to grow better local network of vendors, and they need to find, again, we're not talking about only cost. You're talking about lead time. You're talking about how you can be closer to your vendor. Sometimes you need to review the production line to understand what's your bottleneck, and maybe the bottleneck is something that the vendor is bringing as a value added, but it's in control only for one vendor. So why you don't bring the vendor in house and you start working together to in one way, the vendor is going to work only for you, and in the second way, you guarantee business to the vendor. So there are different ways to phase out this tariff. And the second point is more on how the China will react to the tariff, because and we know that they have a lot of financial leverage and a lot of cost leverage. They might still put more subsidy into what they do locally, and the cost will still go down more, even further than 25%. So it's a little bit of tricky. I mean, for our company, what we do, our investment in China and India is not that huge. I mean, we buy from across the globe, but we try to really be diversified. For certain projects that we need to be very cost competitive, we buy from the low cost regions, and we try to make it work even with the 25% when it's needed. But then for a lot of other components, we buy locally. We try to maintain our community vendor, and we try to be sustainable with our community. I mean, the moment that there are no more vendors in our area, that will mean the end for our fast reaction. I can call a Chinese company and ask them to produce something for me faster, but then I still need to ship it here. I still need to cross the border. I still need to do all the documentation. While if it's across the street from me, I'm faster. I can react faster. Maybe I'm paying a little bit more, but there is other advantage to it. So the China changed a little bit the mentality of a lot of companies, that they were producing only driven by cost. They are looking into other markets. Latin America is one of those. Europe is another one, and they are looking at to how find additional efficiencies on what we do.
Well, that's a great point. And actually, your response triggered a question for me. So, do you think that moving forward there will be more regionalization? So, and I think you're advocating for it, but do you think that, we'll start to think about North American supply chains, ones that were previously China, India driven? Now we're going to bring back a lot of that to North America, be it Mexico or Canada. And, European supply chains that were spread out, maybe they're thinking about kind of regionalizing it as a risk mechanism or hedging mechanism. Do you think that's going to happen?
I think that partially is going to happen. What's going to happen, in my opinion, that people will have a major vendor, which is your tier one vendor or one or two of those by region, closer to their site. And then they're going to have their tier two vendor or tier three vendor that are going to be the one that can kick in case that you have any additional situation like the pandemic. So you will have your tier one that can be regional, that can be closer to home, or can be even cost driven. And then you need to start thinking about, I cannot have only one for my set of product. I need to have a couple of them. And one of them needs to be probably spread out in different regions to try to avoid what we are facing today.
Now, what about cooperation? Do you think, one of the things when we were talking about sourcing in the early stages of the conversation, I started thinking about farming co-ops and things like that, where farmers will band together, in order to generate economies of scale and sell their product at more favorable pricing because they have larger supply and the like. Do you foresee industry coalitions forming or purchasing groups kind of banding together rather than strict competition the way it is now?
I feel that more than that, we are going to move into this cloud of information. So the information is going to be free. The best way to have information shared is a free knowledge, right? So more and more technology, as part of the question was technology, I think that more and more we're moving into the digitalization in the future. Everything is going to be easier to reach, and the vendor is going to be posting all the information in a cloud, and it's going to be reachable for everybody. The control of information is going to be much easier, and it's going to be reachable for anybody that wants to reach it. So I think that the coalition was probably not by industry, but I feel it is going to be by information that we're going to be available to reach and to consult for any decision we make. So it's not anymore a secret. The type of relationship we're trying to build with our vendor is not anymore about cost. It's what do you need to produce this? We need, but more important than that is, if we don't get this type of level of cost for us, we are not going to be competitive with our customer. We're not going to win the business. So where do we need to be, and what help do you need from us to be able to produce at this level of cost? What efficiency can we find? Do you need our help to have more volume or scale with your supply chain? So it's more engaging the vendor on a more intelligent and dynamic discussion of what price do I need to sell my product to be competitive in my market, and where all my supply chain need to be placed into it.
That's a fantastic answer. And I think it ties together one of the first things that you said, which is, this is not tactical. The mere fact that we're engaging with suppliers and we're creating value at tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, it proves right there it's such a strategic element of business. Okay, I think we've got one more question, and then we'll probably close it off. Sorry, two questions popped up, but I think we only have time for one. So I'm going to read the last one that came in regarding the importance of AI and ML, so artificial intelligence and machine learning, predictive analytics in taking tactical supply chain decisions. But can we take decisions based on the past data, as COVID has created a new normal? So basically, how does COVID impact forecasting, right? I mean, are you guys thinking about this as an outlier, or are you going to plan for the scenario where the black swan pops up again, no one saw it coming, now what?
I think that you need to plan for the regular market and then have scenarios. You need to have your own scenarios on when this come out. You need to have your business continuity plan if something like this come up. In supply chain, is before we never had an emergency team. Today, thanks to COVID, you know that you need to form an emergency team. An emergency team is not only me, the planner of the manufacturing center, and my first line. No, it needs to include sales. It needs to include our production people, our operational people. So that's one factor that we didn't have before. How to create an emergency team for a supply chain, how to create scenarios. So if this black swan comes again, what we're gonna do, right? How we're gonna plan. To me, artificial intelligence and machine learning helps us to plan better. Because today, I can tell you, not 90, but 60% of the manufacturing companies still plan only on history of data. They don't have anything to look forward in the future. And that's where supply chain can help. And again, this is something that is new to supply chain, is where is my trend of my market? Where is my cost of my metal next year? Where is my cost of my electronics in 2 years from now? And that need to be included in the forecast that we're doing to plan for our raw material, for our material costing. All of that comes from supply chain. And that's where the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, and everything else can come handy to understand the market, offset the peaks and valley, and trying to help you to project your future based on future analytics as well. And a lot of companies are not there yet. That's part of the digitalization transformation we're going through.
No, that makes a ton of sense. Actually, I do want to squeeze one more question in, but we're going to have to consolidate it because I'd like to be respectful of everybody else's time. The question is, what level of visibility in the supply chain do you think is reasonable, generally speaking? I mean, obviously we know our first tier. We can hope to know our second tier. How far back can we go? Tier 3? I mean, what do you expect as a VP in supply chain? How far back do you want to know and do you want to see?
And if my team is online, they will tell me I'm crazy. No, I like to have as much visibility as I can. And honestly, you need to understand the reality of the business. If you are a business that has 3,000 vendors, you will not be able to expect transparency and visibility across the 2,000 vendors. And that's why you need to segment your vendor, understand the capability, and create some intelligent monitoring of the vendor, right? The thing that you're looking for is setting the metrics and understanding where is the normal behavior on every vendor, and then focus on the one that are not behaving the right way, or in the one that are behaving more than the average, so you can learn what to do with the rest of them. To me, transparency and visibility should be absolutely with our tier 1, because that's the one that probably represents 60% of your business, if not more. And then focus on tier 2 to be able to bring them up as tier 1, right? Tier 3, it's much more tricky because usually you're cost-driven only vendor, or the one that you use once a year just because there is a capacity issue. So it's difficult to build the same type of relationship you build with your tier 1 with your tier 3. It will be fantastic to have. I think that it will be the perfect scenario that you can have visibility across all your supplier base, all your market. It's probably not always feasible.
Yeah, and I think probably the answer depends a lot on what business you're in too, right? I mean, certain supply chains and the supply bases can get exponentially complex exponentially quickly, but that's a really great point. Well, this has been outstanding, and like I said, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I want to again thank the Masters of Supply Chain Management program here, Global Supply Chain Management program here at RIT in the Saunders College. If anybody has questions about that, I'd be happy to talk about it. And I also like to give Karen or Nico just a moment to talk about ITT, because we're very grateful for their participation and support of this event. So I'll hand it over to you guys if you'd like to say a couple words before we close out.
Karen?
Sure, I'm certainly happy to step in here. Well, first, Stephen and Barbara, thank you so much for putting this together with us. This has been very exciting, and it's been an absolute pleasure to hear Stephen and Nico talk about supply chain. I think for folks on the call, many of you, we know that this is maybe your first introduction to supply chain, and I hope that you can kind of see the different facets here in supply chain and just how passionate the supply chain practitioners are. This really, truly is a career that many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people choose and they love. So it's very, very interesting. And I just real quick wanted to touch on the master data management piece. That is becoming more of a centerpiece in almost every career path, at least in manufacturing. We all rely on data. So I come from talent acquisition, and we use a lot of similar data to make our strategies here too. So definitely to everyone on the call, I would say that learning to understand big data is going to be critical moving forward. That being said, we do, if you do have interest in potentially working with ITT here, we do have a careers page that you can access at itt.com/careers. And if you have any questions for us here at ITT, certainly please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to help. Nico, did you have anything to add?
No, it's for me, it's been a fantastic adventure, guys. If you're looking for a company that allow you very dynamic growth and allow you diverse growth, I mean, ITT goes from aerospace to automotive control system, to defense, and then to pumps and valves, right? So we are very diverse. We offer you an international landscape. We are operating in almost every country you can imagine. We have manufacturing in China, India, Europe, across several countries in Europe, where we have Latin America, across all Latin America. We have center in North America. I think it's that was one of the reasons for me to join ITT, is because it's a very dynamic family. It's a super dynamic and growing group, which is very, very enthusiastic. And you can see it. You can go through our earnings call. You can read about ITT. If you need anything, you can reach out to me, and I can give you more information. It's a fantastic adventure. And for us, supply chain is what our leadership believe is going to be a game changer of the future. And that's why we are investing time, resources, and bringing people on board to change the supply chain.
Outstanding company with outstanding people. I can speak to that firsthand. Well, thank you all very much for attending. And to echo Karen's point, the famous statistician Edward Deming, he said, "In God we trust, all others need data." So she's not lying to you. It's real.
She's not.
Thanks, everybody. It's been a pleasure having everyone here. Thank you, Nico. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Steve.
We look forward to the next one. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.